Early 8th century, the Umayyad Caliphate is rapidly expanding its borders both in the east and in the west, thanks to which it was able to establish control over the entire northern coast of Africa. Having reached the coast of the Atlantic Ocean during the expansion to the west, the question arose in front of the Umayyad Caliphate in which direction to continue expanding its borders. But since to the south of the Arab possessions in Africa, there was the Sahara Desert, which was an almost insurmountable obstacle for large armies, the only available option for continuing expansion was to attack north into Europe. The fact that the African possessions of the Umayyad Caliphate was separated from Europe by the Strait of Gibraltar, about 15 kilometers wide, which was not difficult to overcome if there was a fleet, deserves special mention. Moreover, the Berbers who inhabited northern Africa, even before falling under the rule of the Umayyad Caliphate, periodically crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and plundered the coasts of the Iberian Peninsula. However, the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula was not among the priority goals of the Umayyad Caliphate. The fact is that the Arabs did their best to seize the territory of the Byzantine Empire, which was much closer to the main possessions of the Umayyads and was many times richer than the Visigothic kingdom located on the Iberian Peninsula. It is for this reason that the Umayyad Caliphate did not plan to allocate significant army and navy forces to conquer the Iberian Peninsula, as it was focused on the confrontation with the Byzantine Empire. Moreover, the governor of the Umayyad Caliphate in northern Africa did not even have his own fleet at his disposal. In the current situation, the governor of the Umayyad Caliphate in the Maghreb, not having sufficient strength and means to continue expansion, focused on converting the Berbers, who were the local population of the region, to Islam. Thus, the Arabs simultaneously solved two problems, namely, strengthened their power in the region and also increased their military power at the expense of the Berber warriors who converted to Islam. However, the conversion of the Berbers to Islam did not solve the problem of the lack of a fleet. That is why, despite the fact that the military power of the governor of the Umayyad Caliphate in the Maghreb was rapidly increasing due to the lack of a fleet, he simply could not challenge the Visigothic kingdom. But very soon the situation in the region changed. In 710, the Visigoth king Witiza dies, and the Duke of Boetica and Lusitania, Roderick, becomes the new king with the support of most of the local nobility. The sons of Witiza, who planned to take the place of their father, were of course dissatisfied with this scenario, which is why a bloody civil war began on the territory of the Visigothic kingdom, as a result of which the state was actually divided into two parts. The west of the Iberian Peninsula was under the control of Roderick, to the east under the control of the sons of Witiza and the nobility who joined them. However, luck was on Roderick's side, or he simply turned out to be a more experienced military leader. But very soon his army managed to inflict a serious defeat on the army of Witiza's sons. Having lost the opportunity to resist, the sons of Witiza were forced to recognize Roderick as the legitimate king of the Visigoths. However, Roderick's problems did not end there. The fact is that the Duchy of Vasconia, inhabited by the Basques, although it was not part of the Visigothic kingdom, became a participant in the civil war, speaking on the side of the sons of Witiza. Moreover, even after the sons of Witiza recognized Roderick as the rightful king, the Duchy of Vasconia did not stop the war. Thus, Roderick, at the head of his army, was forced to go to the outskirts of Pamplona, planning to defeat the army of the Duchy of Vasconia. Meanwhile, the Arabs carefully watched the civil war in the kingdom of the Visigoths, and knowing full well that it was difficult to come up with a better moment for an attack, began preparing for a landing on the coast of the Iberian Peninsula. It should be mentioned that there is a version that the Arabs did not initially plan to invade Europe, but landed on the peninsula at the request of the ruler of the city of Ceuta. The fact is that during their expansion to the west, the Arabs managed to conquer the entire northern coast of Africa, except for the city of Ceuta, which was the last possession of the Byzantine Empire in African content. The city had impressive fortifications, thanks to which the Arabs, even with the support of the Berbers, who converted to Islam, despite the attempts made, could not take possession of it. The ruler of Ceuta, Julian, who successfully repelled the attacks of the Arabs for several years, had a daughter, whom he sent to the court of the Visigoth king in Toledo, so that she would receive an education appropriate to her status. The problem is that Juliana's daughter was quite beautiful and pleased Roderick, who ended up dishonoring her. Having learned about this, Julian was angry and, wanting revenge, agreed to come under the rule of the Umayyad Caliphate, along with the city of Ceuta, in exchange for the Umayyad Caliphate's promise to invade the territory of the Visigoth kingdom. In addition, Julian gave the Arabs 4 ships so that they could reach the coast of the Iberian Peninsula. Already in the summer of 710, Arab troops on 4 ships crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and plundered the outskirts of the city of Algeciras. Since at this time, the Visigoth army led by Roderick was fighting with the Duchy of Vasconia in the vicinity of Pamplona, the Arabs, without encountering serious resistance, were able to return to their territory with rich booty. The governor of the Umayyad Caliphate in the Maghreb, Musa ibn Nusayr, was encouraged by the successful raid into the territory of the Visigothic kingdom, as well as the fact that the coast of the Iberian Peninsula was practically defenseless. So he ordered his commander Tariq ibn Ziyad to quickly begin preparations for a full-scale invasion, to launch an attack deep into the Visigothic kingdom while Roderick and his army are still occupied with the war with the Duchy of Vasconia. Understanding perfectly well that he needed to hurry, in the spring of 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad completed preparations for the upcoming campaign, and at the head of a 7,000-strong army consisting mainly of Berbers who had converted to Islam, began to cross to the Iberian Peninsula. Since the Arabs had only 4 ships at their disposal, which were provided to them by the ruler of Ceuta, Julian Tariq ibn Ziyad had to transport the army in parts. Arab troops gathered at a mountain near the city of Cartaya, which then began an offensive deep into enemy territory. As soon as the transfer of the Arab army was completed, Tariq ibn Ziyad launched an offensive and immediately captured the city of Cartaya, which surrendered almost without a fight, without offering serious resistance. After establishing control over the city, the Arabs continued to move deeper into the territory of the Visigothic kingdom and planned to continue the attack towards the city of Seville. The rapid advance of the Arab army deep into the Visigothic kingdom is explained by the fact that the local population offered virtually no resistance to them. The fact is that the Visigoths established control over the Iberian Peninsula only in the middle of the 5th century, and since they spoke different languages with the local population, in their eyes they remained invaders. At the same time, the Berbers, who were the descendants of the North African Vandals, who predominantly comprised the army of Tariq ibn Ziyad, who was himself a Berber, were perceived by the majority of the local population as liberators from the rule of the Germans. In general, the Arabs were successful, for the development of which they required additional forces. Therefore, Tariq ibn Ziyad urgently turned to the ruler of the Maghreb, Musa ibn Nusayr, with a request to send reinforcements. In turn, Musa ibn Nusayr understood that he needed to hurry and hastily sent 5,000 soldiers to help Tariq ibn Ziyad. By this time, Roderick, whose army was fighting the Duchy of Vasconia, received news of the Arab invasion. Leaving part of the army to continue the war against the Basques, he hastily advanced towards the Arab army. Along the way, he was joined by detachments of local nobles, much of whom had fought in the recently ended war on the side of Witis's sons, so their loyalty was questionable. The fact is that Roderick was moving towards the Arab army in the western part of Iberia, which had previously supported the sons of Witisa, so he had to use all available reinforcements without thinking about their loyalty. Meanwhile, Tariq ibn Ziyad, having learned about the approach of the Visigoth army, hastily retreated to the coast to wait for reinforcements, and only then engage in battle with the enemy. Soon, troops sent by Musa ibn Nusayr as reinforcements landed on the coast of Iberia, and Tariq ibn Ziyad, having received additional forces, began preparing for the upcoming battle, taking up convenient positions near the Guadalete River. Since the Arabs did not know what kind of forces the enemy had, they decided to play it safe by erecting field fortifications in front of their infantry positions, thus increasing their own chances of victory. At the end of July 711, the Visigoth army under the command of Roderick reached the site of the upcoming battle and began to form battle formations. By this time, the Arab infantry had managed to strengthen their positions and provide themselves with protection from a frontal attack by enemy cavalry. The flanks of the Arab infantry covered areas of the forest in which Tariq ibn Ziyad stationed the Berber cavalry. Thus, thanks to the successful choice of the location of the upcoming battle, The enemy could not bypass the positions of the Caliphate infantry. In turn, the Visigoth army lined up opposite the enemy position. In the center was the infantry under the command of King Roderick. On the flanks were cavalry, consisting of Visigothic nobles, whose loyalty was questionable. As for the forces of the opposing armies, many historians agree that the army of the Umayyad Caliphate consisted of 12,000 soldiers, while under the command of Roderick, there were about 33,000 soldiers. Having assessed the situation, Roderick realized that the enemy, having taken defensive positions, was not planning to attack, so he decided to launch the attack himself. Since the terrain did not allow outflanking the enemy, Roderick decided to use his cavalry to break through gaps in the enemy's defenses, and the infantry, advancing after the cavalry, was supposed to build on the success and defeat the enemy. Having received the signal, the Visigoth army began an attack. The cavalry, picking up speed, was rapidly approaching the enemy's positions. But when faced with the fortifications erected by the Arabs, it was unable to overcome them and engage in hand-to-hand combat, came under a hail of arrows and began to suffer losses. Since the Visigoth cavalry lost its main advantage, speed, and began to suffer losses, it was forced to retreat and let its infantry go forward. In turn, the Visigoth infantry, rapidly advancing, was able to overcome the enemy's fortifications and engage in hand-to-hand combat with him. Despite the fact that the Visigoths had a numerical advantage, the Arabs resisted fiercely, and the fortifications they erected allowed them to hold back the enemy's onslaught. Making sure that the Visigoth infantry was bogged down in battle, Tariq ibn Ziyad ordered his cavalry to attack the enemy's flanks and try to encircle him. The Berber horsemen, having received the order, began to attack. But as soon as they found themselves in the open, they were immediately attacked by the Visigoth cavalry, the onslaught of which forced the Berbers to stop trying to attack and hastily retreat into the forest. The Visigoths did not pursue the enemy, but remained in their positions to protect the flanks of their infantry. Meanwhile, the bloody battle continued in the center, and the Visigothic infantry, thanks to their numerical superiority, began to slowly push back the enemy. Having soberly assessed the situation that was developing on the battlefield, Tariq ibn Ziyad realized that if nothing was done, his army would face inevitable defeat. Therefore, he ordered the Berber cavalry to again try to attack the flanks of the enemy army in order to weaken its onslaught, and if the situation developed favorably, to try to encircle it. The Berbers, having received the order, again launched an attack, which with a high degree of probability should have ended the same as the last one. But it turned out differently. Seeing a new attack, the Berber Visigothic cavalry, consisting of nobles disloyal to Roderick, suddenly turned around and left the battlefield, exposing the flanks of their infantry. Thus, thanks to the retreat of the enemy cavalry, the Berbers managed to deliver a powerful blow to the flanks of the Visigothic infantry and encircle it. Nevertheless, even when surrounded, the Visigoths continued to fight. But soon Roderick, who fought along with his infantry, was mortally wounded and died. Roderick's death undermined the morale of the Visigothic infantry, who soon stopped fighting and began to flee. The Arabs began to pursue the fleeing enemy in order to inflict maximum damage on him. The defeat at the Battle of Guadalete deprived the Visigothic kingdom of not only its military leader, but also a significant part of the army, thanks to which the army of the Caliphate had the opportunity to launch an offensive deep into the kingdom, occupying more and more new territories. Moreover, the nobility, which was initially disloyal to Roderick and did not want to fight against the Arab army, was able to agree on a voluntary transition to the rule of the Umayyad Caliphate in exchange for maintaining their possessions and granting them a certain autonomy. However, despite the fact that the Visigothic kingdom did not offer organized resistance after the defeat at the Battle of Guadalete, the complete conquest of the Iberian Peninsula was quite long and took several years. At the same time, those cities that offered fierce resistance, such as Cordoba and Toledo, were taken by storm by the Arab army, after which direct control of the Umayyad Caliphate was established in them. And in those regions that came under the rule of the Caliphate, local self-government and laws were voluntarily preserved. It was not until 720 that the Umayyad Caliphate managed to establish control over the entire Iberian Peninsula. However, this did not last long. The fact is that in 721, the former bodyguard of King Roderick, Pelagius, rebelled against the power of the Caliphate, and, Having defeated the Arab detachment sent to suppress the uprising at the Battle of Covadonga, he founded the Kingdom of Asturias. Since the new kingdom was located in an inaccessible mountainous area, the Caliphate no longer tried to regain control over its territory, which was its fatal mistake. It was the Kingdom of Asturias that became the heart of the Reconquest, as a result of which the Arabs lost all their possessions on the Iberian Peninsula. True, this did not happen immediately, since the Reconquista process took 770 years. In turn, the Umayyad Caliphate concentrated on strengthening its own power in the Iberian Peninsula. In addition, having conquered a huge territory and using limited forces for these purposes, the leaders of the Caliphate began to think about continuing the offensive deep into the European continent and began to gather forces to implement these plans. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos.